I'm Rabbi Miller, and I welcome everyone to the third part of our series on hunger and food insecurity here in our Southwest Florida community. This is a series that has been put together by our Tikkun Olam Volunteers. Our gratitude goes to Ken Goldstein, Don Belmont, Liz Jaffe, and all those who have been a part of organizing this series as we learn from different community organizations about the real challenges facing us here in Southwest Florida regarding hunger and food insecurity. While we live here in paradise, we are very much aware that there are many who are struggling to put food on the table. And the goals of this forum series have been to understand the Jewish values as they relate to our individual and obligations and addressing the need of our neighbors, learning about the overall status of hunger and food insecurity in both Lee and Collier counties, how it affects different groups within those areas, seniors, veterans, children, and working families, to learn about some of the programs that exist locally and share opportunities for members of our Temple family to assist others who are out in our community and really be able to dive deeply into these topics. Today, we'll be joined by Michael Overway from the Hunger and Homeless Coalition, as well as Madison Mitchell from the United Way of Lee County. And I am Rabbi Adam Miller, and we begin, as always, with our series, starting with some Jewish values, wanting to root ourselves in what it is that brings us here, the values that help inspire us and guide us and move us forward. And so with that in mind, we're going to explore some Jewish values around what it means to deal with those who are working in society but are struggling to make ends meet, getting away a little bit from the simplified version that there are those who have and those who have not, and recognizing that there are those who are gainfully employed but are struggling to make it, which is a theme for our conversation that we're going to be having today. I'll share with you my screen so we can all see this together. And we are talking today about the working and hungry. And we read in the book of Deuteronomy, this text that comes to us and says, "You shall not abuse a needy and destitute laborer, whether a fellow Israelite or a stranger in one of the communities of your land." Tell me, this is where you can unmute and participate. What do you think this is referring to?
I don't think that's what we're seeing.
No? What are you seeing, Don?
I'm seeing one of the presentations, PowerPoint.
The Deuteronomy 24:14?
No, you're seeing my presentation.
Oh, goodness. See, let's try that again then.
Which I would love it if my presentation were quoting Deuteronomy, by the way.
How's that?
Oh, that looks a little better.
All right, so now we're all on the same page. So Deuteronomy 24:14, "You shall not abuse a needy and destitute laborer, whether a fellow Israelite or a stranger in one of the communities of your land." So take a look at this text and tell me, what are we learning here from this opening piece?
I would say you have an obligation to help somebody who is needed, whether it's somebody you know or a stranger.
Okay, so you have the obligation to help those who are in need. And what particular kind? So you notice that they say both an Israelite or a stranger. What else are you supposed to do? And what particular group of people are they identifying here?
People who work, a laborer.
Good, a laborer. So they're focused here on people who are working, who are participating in the community in a constructive way. Your laborers, those who are providing in the community, and you're not to abuse them. That's an interesting term, not to abuse them. You're not to take advantage of them. And so we're going to go a little further. Just the next verse, they explain what they mean by this in the text. As we see here, "You must pay wages due on the same day before the sun sets, for the worker is needy and urgently depends on it. Else, a cry to God, Adonai, will be issued against you and you will incur guilt."
Whoa.
So thank you, Bobby, for the whoa. That's kind of how we're feeling right now. So what is this? This is Torah. Torah is not usually this specific, and yet here we're getting a very detailed glimpse into how it is we should be living our lives, particularly in regards to those who we are employing, those who are performing work for us. Tell me, I want to hear your reactions. What is it this text is adding to the conversation?
People need to be paid fair wages for what they do. And
Okay,
they should be
interesting.
paid, and they should be paid, as it says in the first sentence, on the same day. I mean, I know that doesn't always happen, but these people need to be paid their worth and not try to deny them of what they should be receiving.
Yeah, so
As we know.
there's a lot of different layers here. So first of all, it's interesting. It does not actually say fair wages. That's our own layer that we add into this conversation. I don't disagree with you, Bobby, but that's something we add into this conversation. What we do see is we're supposed to pay them on the same day, which, as you said, is not usually how we think about things. We tend to think you get paid at the end of the week, you get paid every 2 weeks, you get paid at the end of the month. And here it's saying on the very same day, even going so specifically to say before the sun sets. Now, keep in mind, this is an agricultural system. They did not have paychecks or ADT or any other companies who were doing the payment. They were literally having people work in the fields, and they're saying, don't say, oh, wait till the end of the week and then I'll pay you, because you don't know what's going to happen. They're saying you must pay that person immediately the day they work. You don't know if the next day they're going to be able to show up. You don't know if there'll be weather and something causes you to not be able to have them there. Here it's saying to do it. And what's the punishment? Interestingly, it's not just, oh, and you'll be in trouble. It's a pretty serious thing. What happens if you don't pay your worker?
Well, this one is kind of interesting because this is like bringing in the big guy. This isn't how we treat each other. This is like we're you know, God's involved in this edict, in this recommendation.
Right. It's an
so
affront to God.
It kind of escalates it up the chain.
Yeah, it goes all the way to the top, definitely. So if you don't pay your worker in a timely fashion, God will be hearing a cry and you'll incur guilt. This is going, as you said, up to the top level here. Now, why might that be? Think about our own narrative as a people. Why might it be that there were specifically that language, a cry to God? When did we cry out to God as a people?
When we were in Egypt.
Right. Thank you, Ken. We're all thinking Passover. I know. So when we were in Egypt, it says God heard the cries of the Israelites who were there suffering. So what happened in Egypt? We were unpaid laborers. We were the corvée labor. We were the fourth labor force of the Pharaoh. And so it's saying, remember where you came from. Do not treat other workers like you were once treated. Pay them in a timely fashion. And the rabbis do ask, well, why be so specific? Why must they be paid timely? And one take on it comes to us from Rashi. Susan, why don't you read this one for us?
Why should you pay the worker so urgently? Because for the sake of this hire, he exposes his life even unto death. He climbs up a steep staircase or hangs onto a high tree to do his work.
So one reason you might need to pay them urgently is a reflection of what, according to Rashi?
They may not make it the next day.
Right.
Yeah.
They may not make it. There's a risk involved in this. Labor itself incurs some level of risk. Now, they didn't have workman's comp then, so they didn't have ways to protect the workers the way we do today. But it is a recognition that any time someone's working for you, there is some element of what happens if they incur some damage on this. What are they putting at risk? Now, if you're working in an office setting, you might think, what, a paper cut, a staple is going to hit their finger. But in all seriousness, a lot of the laborers who are struggling are doing jobs, service industry jobs, where there are risks to them, to their health, to their well-being. And so one reason Rashi says you must pay workers in a timely fashion is to recognize they're putting a risk out there, because if they do get hurt, they're no longer able to earn more money. So pay them in a timely fashion and recognize the risk that they're putting on the table. Rashbam goes even a little bit further. Ken, why don't you read this one?
For his very soul is in dire need of the payment so that he can buy food to sustain himself. He had to put himself at risk working instead of begging in order to receive his wages.
I think this really gets close to the conversation we're going to have today. This idea that here you have someone who is choosing to work to add something constructively, and as a way to get the resources they need, to get the money they need, they could have opted to beg. Instead, they're risking their body. And so therefore, if they're going to work for you, if they're going to put in labor, you need to be able to pay them in a timely fashion, to treat them with respect, to recognize them as a human being, and to recognize that what they're doing is they're trying to provide for themselves and their family. And even the rabbis understood here the very important link between having the money that's needed from the work and being able to put food on the table. And that's an important piece for us here, that we understand that when we pay our laborers, when we pay our workers, we're not just paying them so that as a trade, we're paying them so they have the resources to provide for others. And Rashbam goes on further, for if you do not immediately pay him as he leaves from his task, and he goes to his home and his wage is with you until the morning, he will die from hunger during the night. Now that's a very dramatic interpretation, but he's saying many of those who are working are probably on the cusp of food insecurity, and that we have an obligation to pay people and make sure they have the resources they need in our community to go from one day to the next, not knowing if they're going to have enough to sustain them from their work. So that even in ancient times, when these rabbis were talking, there was not always enough pay going to those laborers, the hard laborers, that they could sustain themselves for long periods of time. And so even they understood that the community has an obligation to pay them on time. And we would add from our conversation today, the community has an obligation to care for them as well and to provide resources, which is what brings us to our discussion today of those who are the working poor, those who are struggling to get by, who many of them are putting themselves out there trying to earn wages, but might still be facing hunger and food insecurity in our community. We're joined by two wonderful guests today, Madison Mitchell from United Way of Lee County and Michael Overway from the Collier Coalition on Hunger and Homelessness. Hope I got those two in the right order, Michael. Okay. I'm open to hear, I don't know who's starting first, but each of our presenters will be sharing with us about a 10 to 15 minute presentation. We'll go through both of those and then we'll take questions. If you have questions for our guests, please put them into the chat box. You can chat with me directly and I'll then pose it to them as the moderator, and we'll kind of explore some of these conversations and questions that come up during our discussion today. Michael, would you like to start for us?
Yeah, surely. I would also like to just say that I think that it's an interesting flow in Scripture, how in Deuteronomy or in Exodus 20, we're given the commandments, right? Mm-hmm. And God puts them in a specific order of worship for him, family, and then community. And that's kind of how Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy follows that, doesn't it? That Deuteronomy is a very important book in that it identifies the importance of community, right? So I love the way that he has ordered all of that for us.
A bonus teaching, thank you.
Yeah. So if we could go ahead and go to the presentation, and then I'll start walking through our slides here. So I guess I can start while we're pulling up the presentation. First of all, thank you for having the Hunger and Homeless Coalition with you all. We've had a wonderful time meeting with Don and Ken and Susan, talking through, some of the issues that face our community and preparing for this presentation for you all. The Hunger and Homeless Coalition has been in Collier County as an active agency since 2002 is technically when we became certified as a 501c3 in our community. They were actually operating prior to that as what we would call a do-good agency, right? They were trying to do good in our community, primarily centered around hunger issues. The Hunger and Homeless Coalition has several roles that it plays in our community today. First and foremost, it acts as what is the designate from the Department of HUD and DCF, the Department of Children and Families, as the lead agency for hunger and homeless services in our community. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that we're responsible for organizing our community partners and developing long-term strategic plans so that we can address the issues that face all residents of our community, particularly those who are struggling in hunger and homelessness. This designation, we get renewed in that designation every year by the Continuum of Care, which is the body of human service agencies throughout our community. We currently have about 174 members of our continuum of care in Collier County. And we act as the lead for them. In acting as a lead means that we've learned to study what it means to lead from the second chair. In other words, where our mission is to help support our community partners in their specific missions in their specific regions in the county. If we could advance the slide, please. So again, our mission serves as the lead for the COC. We're also in charge of writing for federal and state grants for our community, which helps to bring in resources, including funding to alleviate hunger and homelessness, and hopefully lead to stability in housing would be an ultimate goal for a lot of folks. And we'll talk about that in a minute. If we could advance the slide. So the COC is also responsible for managing our data system, which tracks a lot of the information that I'm going to talk about here. That data system is referred to as an HMIS, or Homeless Management Information Systems. We oversee that system. We support that system to all 159 programs that use our system today in Collier County. And those programs will range from food pantries to human service providers, homeless service providers, even into some healthcare providers. And so we have a definite obligation to manage the system from a perspective of client responsibility when it comes to data security for them, and understand that when we do reports out to the community, that we're reporting from an aggregated perspective of data. In other words, we don't give anybody's personal identifying information out. But it does allow case managers across the system of care to be able to communicate with one another on client files. And a client has to sign a release of information for us to be able to do that. But those files are then shared so that when the client goes from, let's say, the food pantry in Marco Island to the food pantry on Collier Boulevard, Noah's Ark, that client doesn't have to continually retell their story time and time again, right? That the services are populated into that account. And then we can begin to get a picture of what is that household's needs really look like. So, today we have about 381,000 client records in our system. Those track, again, everything from health to mental health to hunger and to homeless services. We also, as the lead agency, help to provide funding to the Collier Resource Center, which is an information and referral agency in our community. They take phone calls, right, and help people get directed to services they need immediately. We in this last year, when we talked, I think that we jumped a slide here, Rabbi, if we could go back. Okay, forward one more, that's fine, forward one more. So I want to talk really quickly about homelessness because it's a growing concern in our community. And what we're seeing today is a trend in our community of, rapidly increasing rent rates. And those rent rates are forcing specifically a lot of the fixed and lower income fixed folks out onto the streets. In fact, just this week, we had a 71, an 80, and a 93-year-old receive eviction notices from their affordable housing unit that they live in because it's being turned into a higher rent rate condominium project by developers. So, this is a quick story. This happened to be a lady, 68 years old. This came from a different perspective in that after 40 years of marriage, the husband told her, "I just don't want you here anymore." And he moved her out of the house and she was living in her car. I happened to come across her at a gas station one evening when my wife and I were headed out for a date night. And I noticed she put in $2.36 and change in her gas tank. And I thought, wait a minute, that's a cue for me, right? So I engaged her in some conversation and she said, yes, no, I've been homeless living in my car for a while. In fact, I work midnight shift at this gas station. And she said, but I can't generally afford enough gas for my vehicle and enough to eat. And so our agency was able to actually pick her up, put her in a temporary lodging in a hotel, and then get her reattached to permanent housing that she could afford. And that happened just prior to this dramatic rent rate increase in this past November. But it's not uncommon for especially a lot of seniors who are entering into this era of uncertainty for their housing to be certainly afraid, right? A lot of them have lost hope. They don't see a way out of this, and for good reason. There's some tough walls that, as a community, we need to try and climb or get around. But we were able to use things like our rapid rehousing funding, which allows for us to take folks who are literally homeless and then pay for their security deposits to move back into housing. So in her case, we were able to get her rehoused relatively quickly. The unfortunate side of this is that the trend that we're seeing is not that today. We can go ahead and advance the slide. During the pandemic, in 2021 specifically, we assisted 600 households with a variety of services, 25 senior citizen females that were homeless. We rehoused from homeless camps. 112 children were kept from entering into homelessness. 91 children were rehoused from homelessness. 20 veterans were rehoused from homelessness. And then we kept 11 veteran households from actually falling into homelessness through what we call homelessness prevention. And just to give you a by comparison, our average year for our little agency is about 178 services a year, so households a year. So we are ramped up way over that. You could advance the slide, please. So, what's next in our community? What does this look like? What things are we going to be facing? Well, we know on average in our community in Collier County, there's about 600 people experiencing homelessness in the camps today. And that's every day. Every year we're required to perform what's called a homeless point in time count, which helps us to do sort of a snapshot of our community. It's not counting everybody, but it's a snapshot of what does homelessness look like in Collier County. And in any given day, we're roughly around that 600 number. We have 1,000 children in our school district who are registered as homeless. And we have more seniors hitting the homeless system of care. When I wrote this, it was weekly. It's daily now, folks. The phone calls that we're receiving at our office have ramped up considerably. And just to give you an idea, between 2017 and 2019, when we were doing our homeless point in time count, we were averaging a trend in senior females, particularly entering into homelessness. It was about 18% a year. And in 2020, we saw this spike of 33%, which was alarming, right? And part of it was that there was lack of employment, right? There was a lack of affordable housing for these folks. So that was creating sort of this upward tick. Well, several universities got together, specifically from the Northeast, and they put together a study of what does homelessness among seniors look like. And if you advance to the next slide, the red line that you see here is actually the southeastern part of the United States, and that's their projection for homelessness over the next few years. Amongst the senior population, 65 and older was their category. We serve 60 as a senior citizen base and older, but the population is definitely increasing. This study didn't take into account the current rent rate increases that we're seeing today, which have actually caused this line to, instead of be a gradual line, it's now turned into a spike. And again, just to give you for an example, since Thanksgiving, we have seen roughly 100 new faces in our outreach team that are doing street outreach, 100 new folks who were not homeless before that are now homeless, in addition to the caseloads that we carry with the folks that you would typically see flying the signs around our community, for example. If we can go ahead and advance the slide. The other side of what we do, as I mentioned, is hunger coordination in the community. So we work with the local food banks and the local food pantries. In 2021, the data system that I mentioned earlier tracked 87,000 clients that received emergency food relief. Right at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, when all of us sort of pulled back and stayed in our homes for those first 30, 60, 90 days, what happened was a lot of the food pantries shut down. And so the literally homeless and those who are extremely low income, who were relying on these food pantries week to week, lost access. And so we were delivering several hundred meals a day out into the homeless camps out of the back of our vehicles. We had several restaurants in our community that brought in staff, and they were making pizzas and meatloaf dishes and so on and so forth for us to be able to bring out, because people just didn't have access to food, period. Well, again, kind of moving forward here a little bit, we started to evaluate, what does this look like in our community? Well, 87,000 residents who are needing emergency food relief is about 23% of our entire community's population. That's significant, right? 36,000 of those residents are in constant food insecurity. The rabbi mentioned that term several times early on. Food insecurity. What does food insecurity look like, right? Well, when we step back and take a look at what is food insecurity in our community and what drives those things, well, we know that certainly poverty drives them, unemployment drives them, and those things would make sense to us. But there's also some other key indicators that drive those things. For example, chronic health conditions. There's folks that lack access to affordable health care or any type of health care. And so, their food insecurity is driven by the fact that they are not getting nutritionally balanced meals because they're not sure what those are, or they just plain and simply can't afford them, right? The other side to that is a lack of affordable housing. When people are generally in the crisis of homelessness, access to appropriate food and nutritious food becomes very secondary to survival, right? And so that becomes a very weighted measure in our community. Especially as that oppresses folks who are living in the extremely low income. We talk about low income households, and what does that look like? Low income households are typically that 50 to 60% of area median income. We're talking about the folks who are 30% of area median income or less. In other words, most of those that are living at the federal poverty level, right? We know in Collier County today, there's roughly 16,000 households that live at or below the federal poverty level. Those are folks that are always managing food insecurity, homelessness, lack of any type of affordability for nutritious food for sure. They're in constant survival mode. And then the last condition that we came across with food insecurity is systemic racism, right? So there's an issue that's, wrapped around this whole idea of, what does it mean to provide into regions that are food insecure that may have populations that are minority populations in our community. Collier County's demographic is generally considered to be about 91% Caucasian, about 7% African American, and the balance makes up Island Pacific or Asian, so on and so forth. So we tend to think in those realms, but the problem being with that is that the significant portion of those persons who are experiencing the food disparity, food insecurity, are the minority populations, right? And so that becomes what's called a racial equity issue in our community. And so we've had to address what does that look like. Children, again, in our community, they make up 40% of those that are food insecure. 100% of our schools in the district, in Collier County schools, have gone to free and reduced lunch for their students because there's so many that signing them up day to day or week to week or month to month is virtually impossible. And so the school district has just deployed the process of everybody's probably going to qualify. And most of our elementary and middle schools do. So, that's, again, a significant number of folks who day to day are insecure about where they're going to get food to begin with, nutritious food, quality food. And so that again is a concern for Collier County. And then senior citizens make up approximately 11%, and that's a growing figure, by the way, as I mentioned earlier, of those who are experiencing food insecurity. Again, when we have the three ladies I mentioned earlier, the 71, the 80, and the 93-year-old, they're living in affordable housing. Those folks are already accessing food pantry services, right? And now they're going to be displaced from that housing into, well, we don't know where yet. And so that's going to create a whole nother level of crisis wrapped around how do I stay sheltered, safe, secure, in addition to how do I get fed, right? That's becomes a whole nother issue. If we could advance the slide, please. So we work, as I mentioned, with the food banks in our community, and the food banks are the Harry Chapin Midwest. We also work with Meals of Hope in our community. And what we do is we collectively look to evaluate and analyze our community based on things like food deserts. Now, what is a food desert? Well, a food desert is an area within our community that has limited access to the things we just mentioned, affordable food, nutritious food. in contrast to those areas in our community that do have great access to those resources, right? And so, you know, when we talk about areas of our community, Collier, it's somewhat difficult, I think, for a lot of folks in the general public to get their head around the fact that we have food deserts. If you would advance the slide, please, Rabbi. You know, there we go. There we go. So the green highlighted areas here are actually areas that we have collectively identified as food deserts. In other words, areas where people don't have access to good food. So to the west and south of Immokalee is the right side of that screen. The left side of that screen, you can see, goes all the way down to the East Trail to areas out that way towards what would be the Collier Seminole State Park area, up in areas of Golden Gate. You know, I mean, it really is stunning when you look at our community to think that a community that has this much resource via wealth struggles this much with food deserts of this capacity, this size, right? If you could advance the slide, please, sir. So we help food pantry partners by not only working in those collective solutions, we also coordinate a lot of interventions, I'll call them, I guess, with our sheriffs and our EMS teams that do wellness checks on folks for us. So every week, our EMS teams that are out in the field, when they come across somebody who's experiencing homelessness or somebody who is extremely low income, they're doing inventories of food that they have, and they let us know what that looks like, which is a huge asset for us because we can't be everywhere all the time. So the more eyes in the community, the better, and then we can help to get those issues usually quickly addressed. We also help, and this is something that people don't know that we do a lot of, but we also help our food pantries with technology improvements. In 2019, we invested $11,000 in food pantries for new technologies. So we go out, we find these grants, and then we help to pass through these grants to purchase equipment for agencies that could use them for more efficiencies. In 2020, we invested $20,000 in technologies. And just as a side note, when the pandemic again first hit and a lot of the students were sent home from the school district, a lot of the kids who were being sheltered either at St. Matthew's House, the domestic violence shelter for abused women and children, Youth Haven, a lot of those kids were inadvertently missed. And I say that because I happen to love Dr. Patton. I think she's done a great job here in Collier with our education system. But it was just a simple oversight. Those kids didn't get technologies. And so we were able to immediately source some funding and purchase 60 laptops and got them distributed out to the shelter programs so that those kids could also continue their education. In 2021, again, we invested another $15,000 in food pantry technologies. And these technologies range anywhere from computers to mobile iPads to barcode scanners, so that when folks pull up with their IDs, we can barcode scan their IDs and it automatically populates services into their accounts, helping to move more folks through. In fact, one of our food pantries, Noah's Ark down there in Collier Boulevard, deployed that system a couple of years ago, has become pretty efficient with it. The only problem that gentleman has today is that now, where it was taking him about 5 hours to feed 400 to 500 households, he now has done that in about 2 hours, which is leaving his volunteers with a little empty feeling because they've run out of food, right? They've processed everybody they could as fast as they could, and they still have a line of folks outside the door. So anyway, if we can go ahead and advance the slide. So what do we need to be doing? Well, hunger and homelessness in our community, we've taken the stance that we're going to work to make those occurrences rare, brief, and hopefully one time for a lot of folks. Those that are hungry and homeless, we know that a lot of this we can do early intervention and prevent their hunger and prevent their homelessness, but it takes community resources and it takes communities binding together on a strategic mission, on educational awareness, right, amongst us all, to know that this is a problem we face in Collier County, and it's something that we can all collectively work on to try and resolve. So again, when I use the word collaboratively, that's all of us, folks. That's every single one of us working together to bring solutions to the table. So, we would just say that we would love to have anybody come and volunteer with us to help us evaluate what we're doing on our strategic plan to work alongside the entire continuum of care. We have several different committees at the continuum of care that look into things like housing and hunger and education and so on, that are always looking for volunteers to serve on those committees. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and I'll be quiet for a moment.
Rabbi?
Thank you, Michael, for that wonderful presentation. That was really informative for all of us, and it's helpful for us to be able to hear that point of view and understand what's happening in our community with regards to hunger and homelessness as a whole. Our other guest today is coming to us from the United Way of Lee County. Madison Mitchell is the Community Impact Director, and she's going to specifically be talking to us about the ALICE program and what happens with those who are individuals who are working and struggling with food insecurity. Madison, welcome. It's great to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Rabbi Miller. I am so pleased to be here and to be spending the afternoon with all of you. And before I get started, I would just like to thank Susan and Ken and Dawn specifically for working with me to get this presentation ready for all of you, and being such advocates for the individuals in our community that we're talking about today. And Michael, that was a great presentation. There was so much that you said that I was just like, yes, like we need to collaborate. I love this. So thank you for that. All right, so as Rabbi Miller is getting my presentation up, I would just like to again introduce myself. Madison, the Director of Community Impact. I've been with Our United Way for about 6 years now. Our United Way has been in Lee County for over 60. So in some cases, I guess in perspective, I'm a relative newcomer to that, but I have been a lifelong resident of Lee County. My daughter is 3rd generation Fort Myers. And so we have a lot of history in the community, and we've really seen it change over the years. And some of that change comes with the need that we've seen increasing. And so I'd like to go to my first slide. And what I'm talking about today is ALICE. So what is ALICE? You may have heard that term, tossed around in different presentations or perhaps with agency interactions. And you might be thinking, is ALICE a person? Is it an idea? Well, it's both. It's a very long acronym. So that's why we use ALICE, because it stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. And so that means, in a nutshell, people that are working but struggling to get by. This could be individuals, this could be families. The ALICE population, they're, because of childcare costs, transportation costs, high cost of living, they're essentially living paycheck to paycheck. Advance the slide, please. So who does that look like in our community? Now, a lot of people, they have an idea in their mind when they think of financial hardship, but the surprising reality is that many of the people who classify as ALICE are our friends, our neighbors. They're sitting next to us, at the movie theater. They're the face of our community. 46% of Florida's population classifies as ALICE or below the poverty limit. So just take a minute to think about that. 46% of Floridians. So these are people who work heavily in our tourist industry, whether it's the hotels, the restaurants, they're, the person who's fixing your car, legal aids, city workers, the people that are packing our agriculture. They're our workforce. They're taking care of our kids. In some cases, they could even be working in our hospitals. So ALICE is really our community. Go ahead and forward. So today I'm going to be spending most of my presentation talking about ALICE in Lee County and things that we are doing at United Way of Lee to address and support the ALICE population. But before we shifted gears to Lee County, since I know many of you are in Collier County, if not all of you, I wanted to just provide the Collier County ALICE data for you. So this survey, the ALICE survey that was done in 2015, these are 2015 numbers. So we know, just based on the growth in our community, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, that these numbers are really greater than they were during this point in time. But this will at least give you a base idea of what our community looks like in regards to the ALICE population. So you'll see in Collier County, 44,948, roughly 33% in 2015, households in Collier County classified as ALICE or below. So on the side there, you'll see a breakdown of different areas throughout Collier County. Now there are some designations there, some CCD, which means Census County Division, which is a subdivision of a county, which is used by the Census Bureau for the purpose of presenting statistical data. That's kind of a mouthful. And CDP, which is a census designated place. So basically this is how the United States Census Bureau breaks up our community. Go ahead and advance the slide there. Oh, just one more back, please. There we go. The next part of that is the household survival budget. So this budget, I think, will really illustrate what it costs to live in our community, the base level. So this is basic necessities: housing, childcare, food, healthcare, transportation. And the ALICE report, and I will share at the very end how to access that, so you can really dive into the numbers if you want more information in Collier County or any other county throughout our state for that matter. But the household budget really, and you can go ahead and advance that so we can see it there. This is the basic needs for someone to survive in our community. And again, this is in 2015. We know these numbers have gone up. So monthly costs for a household of 4 for housing, $990. Now I would challenge anyone, not just on this call, but anyone in Collier County to find housing for $990 for a family of 4. Childcare, $1,100, food, $547, transportation, $644, and so on, for an annual total of $56,112. That is the projected number for a family of 4, what they need to have in order to live annually in Collier County. Now the poverty total, so what is classified at the poverty level, that whole household is making $24,250. So they're living basically half. They're living on half of what is required for their annual income in Collier County. Now the ALICE population is that group in between. So they're not quite making that 56,000, and they're not quite below the 24,250. So they're the in-between levels in our community. Go ahead and advance the slide. So ALICE in Lee County, we have approximately 263,694 households as of 2015, and 43% of them classify as ALICE or below. So I've broken out, I didn't have the full community list on here because in Lee County, they break out the communities thanks to the census. It's a very large list. So I wanted to bring some ones out that you might be familiar with. Bonita Springs, they have it separated in 2 different categories, but you can see that general trend of 38% of that community is ALICE, 36% of that community is ALICE. In Cape Coral, 42%, Fort Myers, 56% ALICE. So these numbers are just, we're talking about basically half of our communities, if not more, in our Lee County community. Go ahead and fast forward. Okay, so the household survival budget in Lee County, again, ALICE are those people that are in between that 52,140 that you see as the annual family income needed to survive in Lee County, but above the poverty level of $24,250. Now, this morning I woke up and I came out into my family room, and there was a miniature swimming pool in the middle of my house here. And luckily we were able to get a plumber immediately out. He came, he had to do some cutting into the walls, spent $500 before it was even 9 o'clock. Now you look at this survival budget and you'll see, where does that 500 fall? Miscellaneous? The miscellaneous category for 395, the typical ALICE person, that budget now, that $500, they can't afford to make that repair, let alone take off the time for work to meet the plumber, right? Because a lot of these positions don't offer pay time off. So one random accident in a house, or wherever they are staying, or if their car breaks down or their child gets sick and they have to call out of work, That can drastically affect them and make them move from that Alice category to Michael's point, they're maybe struggling with homelessness and living at that poverty level. Go ahead and fast forward. So why should we be focusing our resources on the Alice population? If households have sufficient income for adequate food, then we will see improved health, especially for kids and seniors throughout our community, a decrease in behavioral problems in schools. This means lower community health costs, improved workplace productivity, and less spending on emergency food services. So what is good for the few is good for the many. And as we know, that few is becoming more and more of the majority of our community. Go ahead and fast forward. So who are we? We are the United Way of Lee, Henry, and Glades County. We're a volunteer organization. We're very focused on collaborative efforts and bringing people together, much like you all are today, to solve community challenges that we're seeing. Go ahead and advance the slide. So this is primarily, a lot of people in the community know United Way through our fund distribution process. This is very similar in Collier County at the United Way down there. They also are funding agencies throughout the community. Here in Lee County, we fund over 90 partner agencies, which equates to about 250 programs, and they just run the gamut of social services. They're serving food, addressing food insecurity, shelters, literacy, mentoring. This year, we'll be investing $11.3 million in these programs and services. And just as it's quite the process to allocate that. We don't make those decisions internally. We have last year, we utilized 348 community volunteers. All of which, a group such as yourself, you would be able to review a couple of these partner agencies. We had 31 teams that did the review process. We did it all virtually, and our staff spent 103,000 minutes on Zoom reviewing these programs and partner agencies. Go ahead and advance. So besides our campaign and our community investments, we have a lot of internal programming as well. And one of those are the United Way houses. We know that Alice struggles with transportation. If any of you have ever taken a bus in Lee County or possibly in Collier County as well, it can be a very cumbersome process. I know one time I tracked from my house to the office. If I drive that, it takes about 20 to 30 minutes. If I took a bus, I would be on the bus for about 3 hours and I would transfer twice. So, transportation is a huge barrier for our community. There are 16 United Way houses that we currently have in our community, and this is space that we basically beg, borrow, or steal with our community partners. We allow our agencies to have access to the space at no cost to them. So it really knocks down the barrier for our agencies of having the overhead of brick and mortar locations all over the county. And instead, they can focus more dollars on their programming, but still reach everyone in all those pockets of our community. And so last year, over 300,000 client services were delivered through these locations. And why this benefits the families that are coming here is that if you go back in time, a family that had to access a food pantry, well, if they're accessing that food pantry, perhaps they went to their neighborhood church, but there is a reason that they are accessing a food pantry. And so perhaps it is lack of job skills. And so if they wanted some job skills and certifications, they would have to go to XYZ agency on the other side of the county. And maybe English is not the first language in the house. And so they wanted some additional English resources. And so they would have to go to Bonita Springs to visit the Literacy Council. And then there was also a veteran in the household. And so to get to the veteran services, they would have to go to downtown Fort Myers. Well, being able to offer these spaces to the agencies, that individual is able to go to the United Way house and get full wraparound services of all the services that they are needing for that individual or the family. Advance the slide, please. Our We Care medical referral program. When before the meeting was started, we were speaking about Ken, who unfortunately had his fall over the weekend and ended up going to the emergency room. Well, for a family that might not have insurance, you know, we all know if you walk into the emergency room, you know, it's going to be a few $100. After a couple of tests, you're in the thousands. Now imagine if you're given a life-threatening diagnosis like cancer. Well, the reality is when Alice gets a diagnosis for cancer, that individual is going to have to decide, do I pursue treatment or do I ignore that diagnosis and focus on paying my bills, keeping a roof over my head, keeping food in the household for my kids? And that is a decision that no family should make. And so we were very fortunate to partner with an outstanding amount of volunteer medical providers, over 400 of them, who provide life-saving care at no cost. So when an uninsured individual comes to us with a diagnosis like cancer, perhaps they need brain surgery, you know, anything that's connected to their diagnosis is covered at no cost to them. We work with this network of providers to make sure they get that life-saving care that they need. And so last year, over $6.3 million in donated care was given back to the Lee County community to really help those individuals, because nobody should make the decision, do I feed my family or do I get the care that I need? Advance the slide. Another program that we have for individuals that classify as Alice is our Vita program. So in households that have an income of $66,000 or less, we can do their tax returns. We prepare them, e-file them, and direct deposit them. It's completely free. We have very dedicated IRS certified volunteers who prepare those returns. And last year, over $9.78 million in refunds were given back to our community, which was, let's see, 6,659 total returns. So that was quite the feat. And that number grows every year. It puts dollars directly back into these households that need them the most desperately. Advance the slide. Another way we're addressing the Alice population, and Michael, you touched on this earlier when you spoke about the 100% of your schools get free or reduced lunch. And that is true in Lee County. All of the children in Lee County have access to free lunch, which is wonderful, because so many children in our community are food insecure. And we know that that is just one of other problems that are in the household. And so last year, we were able to launch what's called the School Resource Center in partnership with our school district. And what this is children can work, well, their guidance counselors will work to identify children in need in their schools, guidance counselors, case managers, and other key staff members. And when they determine that there is a need, they can put a request into the School Resource Center for those critical items like underwear, hygiene products, uniform items, school supplies, shoes, everything a child might need to really be successful in school, because kids shouldn't be worried about coming barefoot to school. And the reality is we have kids that are dropped off in the drop-off line in the morning that need shoes. And so when they put these orders in, we're able to get that to them in less than 24 hours. Go ahead and advance the slide. And I know I'm getting close on time, so I'm going to just skip through some of these very lightly. We actually have some staff that are embedded in our community partnership schools in Franklin Park Elementary and Fort Myers Middle, which are layering social services for families and kids in need. Go ahead and advance. We have our United Way 211, which every year receives tens of thousands of calls. Many of those callers are from Alice. They're addressing needs such as electric payment, rent payments, COVID-19 testing, tax preparation, and food pantries. So a lot of those needs are mirrored in Collier as well. Go ahead and advance the slide. We also have some health clinic areas. So Michael touched on this as well. It's happening in Collier, but when first responders or doctors are in with patients and they recognize there's a social service need, we can go ahead and connect them directly with social services. Go ahead and advance the slide. So what can you do? So, I know I talk very high level about a lot of these programs. And so you can visit unitedwaylee.org to really take a deeper dive into this and many other programs that we offer our community. Again, many of these are designed by their very nature to serve the Alice population. We are in desperate need of things like underwear and socks, hygiene products for our school resource center. So if that is something that you are interested in, we would love to give you a tour of that area so you can see firsthand how we are making an impact for students. Participate in the fund distribution process. That process does not work without our community volunteers. We have so many generous donors throughout our entire community that support the network of agencies, but that doesn't, as a standalone, we need the stewardship of those dollars, right? So we need an effective mechanism to get those dollars into the programs to make sure that they are serving the populations that they need to. And so we would love to have any of you participate in the fund distribution process. It's a lot of fun. It's a small time commitment. It's usually just a morning or an afternoon. So we would love to have you. Advocate for community resources. You're already doing that by organizing this hunger series that you've been doing. You can also connect with your local United Way in Collier to learn more about what they are doing and how you can get involved in your neighborhood right there. And then just spread the word. When we started this meeting today, it's interesting that in ancient times, they were talking very similarly to what we're talking about today. And so here we are still having the conversation, but we've come a long way. But the conversation can't stop now. And so thank you so much for this opportunity to introduce these resources to you. If you are wanting more information about Alice, you can go to United for Alice and you'll be able to see the full Alice presentation and the data. You can go ahead and minimize that. Yep, there we go, unitedforalice.org. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Madison. Again, what a wonderful presentation. We are so grateful to you and Michael for coming today and being a part of this learning session for us. I'm going to shift it now so that you can see all of us once more. There we go. And we're going to do a little bit of conversation now around some of those topics that the two of you raised up. Now, here's the challenge of this. We have only so much time. So I'm going to throw some questions out to the two of you based on what I've been getting here in the chat and through text and other ways. And I'm going to encourage others to follow up. If you don't hear your question asked, follow up with Madison, follow up with Michael. I'm going to ask our two presenters, well, I know you could probably talk for hours, if not days, on these subjects, to try to limit some of the responses just so that we can get through as much of the conversation that comes up as possible. I see Madison has been kind enough to put her email address in our chat box, madison@unitedwaylee.org. I'm sure Michael will do the same shortly. We'll be able to put that up, but we really appreciate all that you've had to offer. I'm not even quite sure where to begin, but I'll start with a simple question that came in at the start, which is we've learned how to define Alice to some degree. How do we define homelessness in our community?
So that's a great question. Homelessness is, there is a federal statute around homelessness. That statute was put into law in 1987 called the McKinney-Vento Act, and it defines a person as having a place not meant for human habitation or dwelling in a residence that is not of their own with regularity. So we typically follow the HUD definition of homelessness, which is persons experiencing literal homelessness out on the streets, living in the camps, living in abandoned buildings or cars, for example. It also includes folks who are in emergency shelter or transitional housing programs. So St. Matthew's House, all of their clients are literally homeless. The clients in Youth Haven, the unaccompanied youth that we have there, are homeless, as well as Providence House, which is transitional housing for single mothers with children. So the definition of homelessness casts a broader net than that. That's the one that we typically adhere to. The Department of Education and the school district add another component to that, which is families that are couch surfing or children that are couch surfing with other families using their resources to survive.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. A couple questions have come up regarding how much these ideas are well known in our broader community. Alice is a term that you defined for us, Madison. How well is Alice known outside of these kinds of programs that you're running? Is it something that our politicians are aware of? Is it something that we should be more talking about? And the same, Michael, for you afterwards, how much is true homelessness being discussed within our community leadership here in Southwest Florida?
Well, I think we've seen in Lee County a real trend up of people having these conversations. Homelessness has really come to the forefront of many discussions with our Board of County Commissioners here in Lee County, earmarking millions of dollars in funds to help address these issues through our rapid rehousing program and other initiatives. We are actually about to kick off another funding process, which the commissioners have allocated about $20 million, which we can allocate in direct services. And a lot of those direct services are going to affect the ALICE population. And so we're very fortunate that we have that money through the American Rescue Plan Act coming to our community. I think, you know, when it comes to the everyday person, they might not know what ALICE is as a report, but they know who ALICE is because they know that people are struggling. You know, they might not know the term ALICE, but they know that people are living paycheck to paycheck. You know, we're working hard to get in front of our legislators, and, you know, the United Way of Florida does a great job sharing these reports. But I think the community as a whole, we've definitely seen an increase in that communication in Lee County and awareness. Michael?
Yeah, so, you know, I think when we talk about homelessness in Collier County, we have to go back a couple of years when we actually had a councilwoman in the Naples City Council say there is nobody experiencing homelessness in Naples. And one of our deputies, who does quite a bit of work with the homeless in the community, partners with our outreach team, said, really, how about I take you out to a few of the camps? And the first camp that he took that councilwoman to was actually a 65-year-old woman who had been sexually abused because she's alone in her camp. After the two of them got done wiping, you know, their eyes dry, the councilwoman became an advocate. You know, so I think the problem, as you identified, Rabbi, is that I think for years our community, specifically in Collier, has not done a great job of telling the story. I think we're getting better at telling our story of what really is going out, you know, amongst our populations, what's happening. You know, when today we're getting much more media coverage, thankfully. You know, in Fort Myers, you had a mom on TV the other day with 4 children, right, that is being displaced from her housing due to high rent rates. We have on our outreach caseload right now in Collier, 12 single moms living in their cars with their children, can't afford housing. So, you know, those are stories that, again, I think we're just getting better at telling. And once we tell them, I think people are willing to take action. So, you know, shame on us in our community for years for not really telling that story that well, I think.
Yeah, it's the storytelling is vital to get this out, to have those stories of the individual. You shared her story with us, that you met her at the gas station, to hear those other pieces. Are there ways that people can access some of these stories? I know a few years ago, the movie, The Florida Project, really struck a nerve with people. If you haven't seen it, it's a very powerful expose of a little bit of Alice, a little bit of homelessness, and right there in the heart of Orlando, right at the gates of Disney, young people dealing with these issues. Are there other elements like that that can help bring these stories to life in a way that's not overly Hollywood produced, but is clearly something that people want to connect with? Because if you overproduce it, it means that people will say, oh, that's not really what's happening. I know that's why the Florida Project struck a nerve. It was very much a documentary element to it. What other things can people look at to really open themselves up to this?
Madison?
Sure. You know, one of the things I think that is very accessible and it's very easy for people to share, and it's not, as you say, Hollywood produced or anything like that. But if you just, you know, on our social media page, and I'll put it in the chat box, but, you know, we're continuously sharing everyday success stories from our partners, from our programs. You know, we're always sharing videos that we have, you know, little snippets of success stories from our We Care program, and just sharing that with your social network, you know, really goes a long way, and it makes it very consumable, right? It's very it's something easy. There's a picture, there's the snippet, and it, you know, it's very shareable. So I would say, you know, if you access that, we would love to have you share those stories.
Yeah, and I think, you know, on our webpage, we've put on the very front, our landing page, data that's telling the story in our community about, who's experiencing homelessness, what do their family households look like? Are they veterans? Are they single moms? Are they singles? Are they, so we're trying to tell that story through some visualization. Again, we're getting a little better at that. I would definitely covet Madison's budget for sure to be able to do some really cool social media stuff like they do. We're just sort of breaching into social media ourselves. The other day, I took that story from Fort Myers and I posted it out and I said, this is a common occurrence in Collier as well. And within 30 minutes, we had about 85 conversations going on around that about what do I do? I'm in that position. How do I access services? So, again, it's a very telling story when we get out there and talk about the resources available in our community. People will respond to that, both funders philanthropically as well as clients who are in need. So.
You both touched on the emotional nature of the work that you are doing and the stories that you're taking on. A few people have written in concern just about your well-being and wanting to know, how do you deal with the emotional and psychological toll and drain that this takes on you as you're out there trying to make a difference in our community?
Michael, I'll let you answer that first.
All right. So, thank you, Madison. I think some days better than others, quite frankly. It wasn't just about a month ago, I pulled into our parking lot at work and one of our outreach guys, who he himself had been chronically homeless for 10 years, was an honorably discharged Navy veteran, but had just sort of lost his way for a while, right? Well, we were able to hire him through some coordinated efforts with Wounded Warriors of Collier County. Turned out to be a huge asset to us, but he was sitting in his car in the parking lot and I pulled in. Now, this guy is normally first in the door, right? He'll beat me in the door in the morning. And so it was unusual for him to be sitting in his car. And so I walked up and I rapped on his window. I said, hey, what's going on? And when he turned to look at me, I could see he had been crying. And so he said, hey, can you get in the car for a minute? And so I, climbed in the passenger seat and he said, I've got several seniors who are going to die this week in the camps and I can't stop that. So the toll is real, right? Our team takes a lot of weight. And some of you may have heard the term burden bearers, right? We have a lot of that we deal with, where we take on a lot of folks' burdens. And sometimes we don't always get to process that information off our souls as quickly as we would like to, But I think here's the flip side to that, is that if this job ever becomes about numbers and not about people, I can guarantee you 100% of my staff would resign. It is about people. We care about people, and we're there to try and serve as many of them as we can. And by being that connected into our jobs and into our community, sometimes you pay a price for that, where you have to take a moment. So we've instituted mental health days at our agency. If you need a day off, you call me, right? Because we're going to arrange that so that you can get a bit of a respite from what's going on.
Wow, thank you.
We see that with our 211 staff. They take tens of thousands of calls every year, and when someone calls 211, they're calling because they are in a crisis, whether they're a night away from being evicted, or their kids haven't eaten in a week, or a senior who's been living with her power shut off for over a month. So it is hard, knowing that we have so many amazing community partners and resources. We're very fortunate in our community that there are so many collaborative agencies that we're able to refer to or offer the services in-house. So seeing those success stories and being able to provide that lifeline is what keeps our staff going, for sure. But it can be very difficult.
Thank you both for opening up and sharing those pieces. It is emotional work and it is vital work in making our community more whole and holy. A final question for each of you, and I certainly hope that people will direct themselves to your websites for the more information from the organizations and find ways to partner with you going forward. I'm going to combine two questions together. You can answer either or both as creatively as you like. One piece has come in asking if there are creative solutions to some of these issues. In some communities around the country, they think outside the box. An example would be somewhere like Aspen, Colorado, where when someone builds a new home, a large home, they have to build a guest property on the guest home on that property. They rent out to others who can't afford the larger homes. Are there creative things happening in our community to address some of these issues that we have with Alice or with homelessness? And similarly, are there policy changes or things that we should be advocating for in a bigger picture, recognizing it's great that we can be there to try to address the problem in front of us, but how do we stop the problem from continuing? How do we go upriver, so to speak, and stop the folks from falling in? We don't have to keep pulling them out and rescuing them.
Wow, those are two great questions, right? I'll, I guess, take on both of them. We prior to the rent rate increases that we started facing in 2021, we had instituted a model called the Golden Girls model, right, for housing. It's a shared housing model, right? We have successfully paired folks up in homelessness to live together and to provide supports with one another in order to have and achieve housing, food, stability, things of that nature. So we sort of took that box and kind of threw it away, right? And said, listen, we got to be really creative. And it literally happened one night. I was watching a Betty White recap thing, and I went, oh my gosh, they're doing shared housing, right? So we can do that in Collier, right? And so I talked to the team, and they're like, yeah, that's a great idea. So we've done a lot of the shared housing. Again, the problem we're facing today is we've got a lot of landlords now who are looking for cash in hand, and they're not necessarily wanting to even pursue that. So that's become a wall that we've sort of hit here recently. The second part of your question is one of the things that I am fortunate to be able to do is I serve on the Florida Coalition to End Homelessness, which is a statewide advocacy board. And we, along with our lobbyists, are continually working with the state legislature. By the way, Senator Kathleen Passidomo is the president of the Senate this year. And we have her ear, which is terrific. She's done a really good job of listening to our concerns. But having things instituted, whether at a local municipality, at a county level or a state level, of things like rent rate increases, caps on those things, we need to advocate for those things. I think that the condition that we're going to continue to see in 2022 is going to warrant even a state of emergency for housing. I think FEMA is going to need to come in and bring in those portable trailers like they did during the hurricanes and help set up tiny villages with those things temporarily so that we don't have masses of our population living out on the streets. And so those are things that we work on every day, both those to answer both those questions.
Thank you.
And I'll just answer the first part, because I think Michael did a great job about talking about, keeping this conversation at top of mind with your legislators. But, out of the box ideas, we live for out of the box ideas. And so a lot of our programs, like our community partnership school, started because we had a conversation with our community partners, and we said, there's a gap of services, or there's a need, or we're seeing an increase in homeless families from this specific community. What can we do? And so, partnering with our school district, Florida Gulf Coast University, and Lee Health, we've actually moved the social service and healthcare staff into these schools, and they are there every day as almost like a district employee, as a resource on a daily basis for these students and families. And that's something Lee County had never experienced before. And now we have 2 of those schools in just 2 years. We're hoping to get a high school soon to that mix. So we have a element, cradle to career, if you will, pathway of social services. So we can follow these families to make sure they stay out of homelessness, that food security is never an issue, that they're getting their wellness checks. And we would love to see that model in the years, to follow, duplicated in other areas of our community, like Bonita Springs. That would be certainly a targeted area. So, we're always happy to just sit down and think of where are the gaps and how can we work together to fill them. So out of the box ideas are always at the forefront of us.
Great. Well, Michael Overway, Madison Mitchell, thank you so much for being here with us today as this third session that we've had together on hunger and food insecurity in our community. I know we've gone a little beyond our time, but I think it's been such an engaging and powerful learning experience for us. I really encourage everyone to go back. If you haven't already seen them, go to our YouTube channel, Temple Shalom, Naples, Florida YouTube channel. You'll find the first 2 sessions of this as we explore hunger and food insecurity in different ways around our community, looking specifically at children, at seniors, at what's going on with our local food banks. I encourage you to work hard to explore those things and really make that a priority, figuring out what we can do to help here in our community. Know that we have some wonderful resources, some phenomenal individuals, as we've seen, who are working here to address these issues, but they can always use more of our help. And we will continue as well at Temple Shalom to do this good work through our Tikkun Olam Volunteers. We're grateful to all those who helped plan this series, to Don Belmont, Ken Goldstein, Susan Hager, and Di Karpman. Thank you for arranging this opportunity for us to learn together. May we all as one work to make sure that our laborers are paid fairly, that those who are making our community function have the resources that they need, and that here in paradise, the blessings that we experience are not just for those of means, but for all of us to be able to enjoy life here, a life of blessing, a life of goodness, and a life of peace. As we say, amen. Thank you everyone for joining us for this third and final session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.